Hello, my name is Jill Mencke, and I'm the Youth Justice Policy Analyst at OK Policy. Oklahoma Policy Institute is a nonpartisan independent policy think tank dedicated to advancing equitable and fiscally responsible policies that work to expand opportunities for all Oklahomans. Prior to this position, I worked as a family preservation specialist, where I saw firsthand the difficulties in navigating the child welfare system and the hardships that families face, which is why I wanted to take on policy work to transform the child welfare and youth justice systems. At Oklahoma Policy Institute, we've collaborated with OJA and partners across the state to gather information and build a better understanding of the youth justice system. So today, I'll go over the history of youth justice in Oklahoma over the last 50 years. Then I'll discuss the current state of youth justice, including recent reforms in Oklahoma, and the data on where things stand now. And then I'll move into policy recommendations to improve the youth justice system. The one takeaway I want you all to leave with today is that the youth justice system is underfunded and preventative and rehabilitative services are scarce and difficult to navigate. If we want to transform the system for youth into one that will be truly effective rather than punitive, we have to begin by investing more into our services. While reducing the number of youth who are referred into the youth justice system is ultimately a good thing, it won't solve all of the problems surrounding youth justice, including the overrepresentation of Black youth, age-appropriate services for youth, and delivering services to all 77 counties. The youth justice system hopes to be rehabilitative for youth because that produces better outcomes, but Oklahoma has tended toward being punitive. Oklahoma has come a long way from the gross abuses of individual liberty in the juvenile justice system in the past, but it now has the opportunity to be a national leader in youth justice. I'm starting in the 1970s to draw attention to more recent events that have directly influenced the state of youth justice today. But if you want more history on Oklahoma's youth justice system, check out Better Tomorrows, which is available at okpolicy.org. That report goes into far more detail than I can here. In 1974, Congress passed the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, which made federal funds available for states that accepted reforms, including emphasizing prevention and treatment rather than punitive options. Just 6 states, including Oklahoma, refused those grants in order to avoid federal oversight. Oklahoma did not accept these funds for another 20 years. Then, around the same time in 1978, the Terry D. lawsuit was filed on behalf of 7 teenage plaintiffs over horrific treatment of children in state facilities. At this time, juvenile offenders were held in the Department of Human Services custody. This lawsuit resulted in the establishment of the State Commission of Children and Youth, the closure of several facilities in the state, and changes in practices after a federal court ordered a consent decree on how the state could treat youth in state custody in 1984. The Terry D. lawsuit was still not resolved by the time the Youthful Offender Act was enacted in 1994, which introduced the ability to transfer youth to the adult system for offenses committed as children. Youth may be tried as a youthful offender depending on age and the nature of the offense. The Terry D. lawsuit also led to the creation of the Office of Juvenile Affairs, or OJA, in 1995 to be the sole facilitator of youth justice issues and programming. This wouldn't be the end of civil rights lawsuits in the name of youth justice, though. In 2004, a second civil lawsuit was filed against the Lloyd E. Rader Juvenile Detention Center, which had also been involved in the Terry D. suit. Investigators found widespread violence by both staff and youth at the Rader Center. This lawsuit eventually led to the closure of the Rader Juvenile Detention Center in 2010, and in the same year, the legislature formed the Juvenile Justice Reform Committee. This committee made several recommendations around bringing Oklahoma's juvenile code in line with best practices, but budget shortfalls rendered most improvements impossible and eroded supports already in place for youth. These budget shortfalls meant that improvements to the youth justice system came from legislation rather than programming. In 2015, SB 457 established juvenile competency requirements. While Oklahoma was the last state in the nation to do this, Oklahoma now leads the way in this area of law. However, Oklahoma still lacks remediation services for youth found incompetent, so there's currently no path for restoring competency for youth. This means that youth found incompetent have no services catered specifically to their needs and don't have access to a treatment plan that is directly tied to their offense. In 2020, the Juvenile Justice Protection Bill prohibits children 12 years of age or younger from being placed in a state juvenile detention facility outside of specific high-risk circumstances. And all of that leads us to today. Since 1997, the amount of youth in residential placement or detention has declined year after year. Briefly, detention refers to any sort of confinement, whether that be a group home or a secure detention center. Some other terms to know is referral, which is an official recommendation from law enforcement, teachers, social workers, or others to OJA that a young person is in need of intervention. Adjudication refers to an official judgment in court based on an offense and leads to sentencing or recommendations for probation or other services. Showing this data, I want to dispel the idea that young people today are committing crimes more often than they ever have before, because the truth of the matter is that youth delinquency is at its lowest level since it has been measured. This graph shows the national point-in-time count of youth placed in residential facilities since 1997. With the overall occurrence of youth delinquency at a historic low, Oklahoma has the opportunity to invest more resources in delinquency prevention and alternatives to incarceration. We know that incarceration does not reduce delinquent behavior, causes substantial harm to young people's growth and development in and out of school, and hurts their opportunities for employment when they leave school. Like most states, Oklahoma has seen a steady decline in referrals over the last decade when the most reliable data for Oklahoma was available. We did see a slight uptick in 2022, but this indicates that the number of referrals may be returning to pre-pandemic levels and that the sharp decline in referrals seen in 2020 was largely due to the pandemic. The reason we use the referral data point is because youth and adults enter the justice system in different ways. Some youth are involved in crime, arrested, and formally processed through juvenile courts, while other youth enter the system through referrals from social service agencies, schools, or parents, similar to the process of the child welfare system. We'll have a more comprehensive view on outcomes for youth as we continue to look at the data and collaborate with OJA, but it is encouraging that referrals to OJA have been in steady decline since 2011 and have decreased by 58% in the last decade. So taking a closer look at the data, this bar chart shows the number of referrals to OJA broken into categories. And as you can see, public order offenses make up the largest portion of referrals to OJA, followed by violent, property, and drug offenses. The type of offenses that make up public order crimes include runaways, obstructing an officer or avoiding arrest, or truancy. You can also see that the number of youth referred for violent offenses are increasing. And this is likely because as the overall number of referrals decrease, only the most serious offenses would be referred to OJA. The top offenses that make up this category include burglary, larceny, or destruction of property. While the amount of youth referred to OJA is decreasing, this has created increasingly disparate outcomes for Black youth. On this graph, red represents Black youth. As you can see, after the sharp decrease in youth referrals in 2020, the proportion of youth referred to OJA who are Black increased. To demonstrate this disproportionality, I've also included U.S. Census numbers on the racial makeup of Oklahomans. Black Oklahomans make up about 8% of the population, but nearly 25% of OJA referrals. For a comparison, white youth comprise nearly 2/3 of the population, but only half of referrals. This disparity is especially important to digest because research supports that Black youth don't engage in risky behaviors at higher levels than their peers, as the referral numbers you're seeing might suggest. This demonstrates that reducing the number of youth involved in the justice system does not have enough of an impact in itself on the disproportionality of Black youth in the justice system, and that alternatives should be considered. Taking a bird's eye view of referrals across the state, the share of children referred to OJA varies significantly by county. Some counties that put forth more referrals than others include Kay, Canadian, Tillman, McCurtain, Washington, and Comanche counties. There does not appear to be any sort of relationship between urban or rural counties having more referrals than others, indicating that systems that participate in referrals to OJA treat youth differently across counties. I also wanted to highlight the age makeup of referrals to OJA. As you can see, children under the age of 13 make up a small portion of referrals to OJA, less than 9%. And knowing what we know about child development, it doesn't make sense for youth under the age of 13 to receive court involvement should they commit a crime. Additionally, only around 30 youth aged 12 and under are adjudicated, meaning that they were officially involved in court proceedings. The court system is not designed or equipped to help children understand the relationship between their court involvement and their behavior, and children at this age are much less likely to understand the consequences of their actions. The most recent reforms in the youth justice space have done wonderful things to transform the system, including barring youth from being housed in adult facilities. But this can still happen in extreme circumstances, which means that all alternatives have been exhausted and that the youth committed an offense which would be considered a felony if committed by an adult. In 2021, HB 1799 passed, which provided a framework for juvenile expungement, which is critical to the idea that youth are capable of reform. Then in 2022, Oklahoma Policy worked with Representative Talley to pass HB 3205, which eliminated or capped most court fees for youth at the state level. However, some fees, including for probation and cost of detention, and most fines still remain. Lawmakers have the opportunity to make our justice system fairer for youth. They have the ability this session to establish a minimum age of adjudication to ensure justice for young children, continue to eliminate fines and fees, which create financial barriers for justice-involved youth and their families, and they have the opportunity to fully fund OJA for providing effective alternatives to incarceration. Establishing a minimum age of adjudication means that rather than being put through court proceedings, young children referred to OJA would receive developmentally appropriate services suited to their specific needs. Adjudication is an official judgment in court that a crime was committed and a sentence is given. With a minimum age of adjudication of at least 12 years old, young children who may commit crimes would be referred to services for treatment rather than be subject to court involvement or placed in OJA custody. 26 states have already established a minimum age of adjudication, including Texas, Kansas, Arkansas, and Louisiana. Receiving rehabilitative services for treatment better serves young children and preserves resources for older children in OJA custody. Diverting young children from the justice system to social services helps them stay in school, which helps prevent problem behaviors and sets kids up to succeed. When young children become involved in the justice system, it increases the likelihood that they would commit a crime as an adult. As in the adult system, fines and fees create barriers for youth in the justice system and their families to achieve financial success after justice involvement. The fees that remain include cost of behavioral or mental health treatment while detained, cost of representation, and probation and supervision fees. While these numbers may sound small, a fine of $15 or up to $25 a month, often juvenile cases have multiple fees assessed depending on the charge and judgment, and those small fees can add up to quite large amounts. Further, estimates suggest that only 5 to 11% of costs assessed on criminal cases are collected, making it an inefficient revenue stream for funding courts and probation services. Additionally, HB 3205 touched on ability to pay, but fines are still assessed to youth based on the offense. Since this is left up to the judge, fines can climb up into the thousands of dollars. I also included restitution in this category, but it really is its own category. The collection of this fine would go to the victim of an offense, but the costs themselves are not outlined for specific offenses and are ultimately left up to the discretion of a judge. OJA's motto is that OJA and its community partners provide prevention, intervention, education, and treatment services to build strong families, successful youth outcomes, and safe communities. OJA has taken steps to keep young people in their communities rather than detention by implementing more evidence-based community-based services like functional family therapy. But due to funding constraints, these services are not available in all counties, especially rural counties. OJA provided an estimate to OK Policy that this would cost $8 million to implement, which is an 8% increase in their budget. Implementing more alternatives to incarceration to the youth justice system is important because our current system of leaning on correctional facilities to rehabilitate youth is ineffective. Research consistently shows that youth who are released from correctional confinement suffer high rates of rearrest, new adjudications or convictions, and reincarceration. In addition, reducing incarceration numbers alone has not created equal outcomes for all youth in the justice system, as Black youth are increasingly likely to be referred to Oklahoma's youth justice system. Some of the programs Oklahoma could implement include credible messenger programs, youth advocate programs, and restorative justice, which are all effective alternatives to incarceration and reduce further involvement in the youth justice system. These programs are also less expensive than detention. Detention is the most expensive and least effective way to treat delinquent youth. Oklahoma's children and families need more resources than are currently available, and they deserve better than the system we have now.